Hey classes, welcome back. If you look at today's video recap, it's a good day to make sure that you check out today's YouTube video. I'll make sure I put that on the note home because it really recaps. It goes over everything that we've done in the first 4 weeks of school. Now it hasn't been a complete 4 weeks because of course we started on a Wednesday, but the things that we've done so far have laid the groundwork for studying life. If you look at the 7th grade standards, one of the things they talk about is, of course, that the focus is biology, but they also throw in things like engineering standards, the engineering practices, and of course, radiation and understanding a little bit about the electromagnetic spectrum. So the first couple of weeks here, we haven't really directly talked about life. We're kind of setting the stage. We're kind of setting the groundwork for what we need to understand about life. Today we started with a brain pop. I'll talk about that in just a second. Just a quick reminder that our test is out there and is posted. Our week 4 test would be our second quiz or test. It's online. The links have been set. And our spot check. Our spot check this week, every week we do a spot check, so count on 2 grades per week. The spot check this week is your key terms. We had 10 key terms this week. Those 10 key terms are going to carry us into the next week because it was a shortened week. We had Monday off, of course, and we're going to use those next week as we just touched a little bit on energy, a little bit on cells, and that was about it. So moving on in here, we've got the brain pop that goes into how atoms get together. When you're in chemistry, now I kind of want to start a chemistry club here in 7th grade. You do chemistry in more detail in 8th grade, high school, and beyond. And in chemistry, you're talking about the ways that atoms either share electrons or trade electrons to combine to form compounds. And that's really important for understanding life. And so earlier, when we went into protons, neutrons, and electrons, that's a lot of what you cover in detail in 8th grade and beyond. Really, in chemistry, you're talking about the rules of how certain elements combine with other elements. For us, we need to know the basics of just, okay, what is inside of an atom, because, for example, the neutrons and the protons, knowing a little bit about the protons and the neutrons will help us understand radiation. In 6th grade, you may remember when you studied, for example, ancient Egypt. We do a lot of things on radioactive dating, carbon-14 dating. That might, ring some bells. If you look at carbon-14 dating, you've got understanding radiation by understanding what's going on inside an atom. Certain atoms being unstable, when they release a neutron, when they change from one element into another, which can happen naturally, it lets us know how old, in the case of carbon-14 dating, lets us know how old once living things were. So that's why we go into that a little bit in detail here, but not too much. That's more of an 8th grade and high school thing and beyond. So we over-taught it a little bit today in terms of how atoms combine, what they share, they give away, or they get electrons. That's the 3 ways that atoms combine to form bigger compounds. In particular, in this class, we've talked already about hydrogen and helium. That's come up a couple of times. And when an atom gains or loses an electron, we simply don't call it an atom anymore. Now, it's still an atom, but we call it a charged atom, or it's got a special name called an ion. Ion will not be one of the key terms this week. I really just wanted to point that out because you're going to go into ions quite a bit when you get into 8th grade chemistry. Moving on from there was a really good chance, you can see all the stuff that we use back here for teaching, to see this board right here. These notes, by the way, are out there online. Check out pacificascience.org and your Google Classroom. But when you're looking at the board that's behind me now, this is where we started, the Big Bang. Now we started with it for a couple of reasons. One, it's a little bit like our history class. In other words, this is the starting point for our year, the beginning of our universe as we know it, 14 billion years ago. There was a couple of reasons we started with that. One of the biggest ones was the scientific method. Okay, Mr. Forbes might be, have some gray hair, be getting kind of old, but I'm probably not 14 billion years old, so I want students to be skeptical. If a teacher puts up on the board, well, the universe is 14 billion years old, okay, how do you know that? What are some pieces of evidence that show us how you know that? Well, the first piece of evidence that we started with, and again, go back on your notes and make sure you have these, was simply Hubble plotting the speed with which galaxies are moving away from us, and basically we found the further away a galaxy is from us, the faster it seems to be going. So that was a big piece of evidence that, hey, if you go back in time, if you run the movie backward, everything was probably together in one place at one time. Also, the other piece of evidence that we hit yesterday was this background radiation, this background light in the form of radio waves, microwaves. Now, the reason we talk about that is, again, with the 7th grade standards, we spend a little bit of time talking about the electromagnetic spectrum, in particular, how we can tell what elements are out there based on their emission or absorption spectrum. Basically, a rainbow and the colors that are absorbed help us figure out what atoms might be present, say, in a distant galaxy or in the atmosphere of another planet. Again, that gets back to the first board over here where we talked about protons, neutrons, and electrons. A little bit of understanding about electrons is critical to understanding a little bit about the electromagnetic spectrum. Moving from there, after the Big Bang 14 billion years ago, because of the 4 fundamental forces, that was something I simply asked you to remember. We have the strong force, we have electromagnetism, we have the weak force, and we have gravity. Because of those 4 forces, everything else, all the way up to this green blob, which is our study of life, that's what we were going, everything else fell out of that. If you're looking at the 4 forces, you've got protons, neutrons, and electrons coming together to make hydrogen atoms for the most part. But our universe would be a very boring place if it was just a bunch of hydrogen atoms floating around. So fortunately for us, one of these 4 forces in particular we focused on, gravity, caused stars to form by, if you will, clumping together the hydrogen gas. When stars form, one of the important things that stars do is they manufacture the heavier elements. Across the room, we point at the periodic table, the 100 plus elements that you see in all the chemistry classes in high school and in 8th grade. The periodic table, the basic building blocks, those 100 plus elements that we see, are made, for the most part, inside stars. For example, in our sun right now, our sun is busy because of the tremendous pressure and gravity making all the elements up through 26, through iron. When a star explodes, when a star reaches the end of its life, it blows itself apart. Again, for the most part, those supernova explosions release all the other elements on the periodic table. Everything up past 100 gets made when a star blows up. This now sets the groundwork for life, because when you've got those other elements out there, when certain clouds in space recombine in big clouds called nebula, we haven't talked about those much yet. We just saw a couple of pictures of them the other day when we did the electromagnetic spectrum. But when you see these clouds combining again, for example, when our solar system condensed about 4.5 billion years ago, the elements were now present that made it possible for life to evolve here on Earth, for life to come about here on Earth. You've got, for example, the elements that we've seen come already in class that have combined. We've got sodium and chlorine getting together to make table salt. It's an ionic compound, by the way. We've got one that we'll see again and again in here, which is good old water. The Mickey Mouse molecule, we've got 2 hydrogens and an oxygen getting together to make 1 molecule of water. Again, critically important for life in terms of a compound that makes chemical reactions possible. When you're looking at this story, so far it's been a history story. How did we go from 14 billion years ago, a Big Bang, to hydrogen atoms, to bigger elements, to a bunch of molecules that get together, and now in the class, hopefully we've set the stage for understanding some of the molecules that make life possible, some of the molecules that are made by life. You already know most of these names, proteins, lipids or fats, carbohydrates. You've probably heard most of these names before at one point or another. In this class, we talk about how those come together to make cells, to make the chemical reactions that make living possible. And then again, getting back to the standards originally, a little bit of engineering fits in there because, of course, there's genetic engineering. We're actually able to manipulate DNA and RNA now. And then finally, one of the last things that will be kind of a theme throughout the year, because of course we're usually, we're always teaching with a mask on and the students all have masks on. We're going to be talking quite a bit about the coronavirus. What is it? How are viruses put together? What chemical reactions, what chemical configurations make viruses possible, and how that fits in with everything that you're learning across the hall in social studies and up there in math class. That's where we're leaving it today. Again, look online for this week's test. It's out there online, the quiz. Obviously due at the end of the day on Friday. You can take it now in class or at school after school because it's been cleared at the school district, so it's not blocked. It was a site that was blocked. It's called Easy Test Maker. You can see it for yourself. And fortunately, the tech team has unblocked it because they accidentally had it blocked before. You can take those tests, and you can also make sure that you take a picture of your 10 key terms up there. All right, that's where we're leaving it today. Tomorrow, our experiment involves a pendulum. We're going to go a little bit more into gravity. And one of the big reasons we're doing the pendulum experiment, it's one of my very, very favorites because usually it surprises students a little bit on the results. We're going to be checking the period of a pendulum, the way it swings back and forth. We're going to be plotting the data, and we're going to make sure that we understand how to plot the independent variable versus the dependent variable. Remember, the independent variable goes on our x-axis, and the dependent variable goes on the y-axis. That's where I'll leave it today. Have a great day, everybody. I'll see you on the open house video too that I'll send on out there, and I'll see you in class. Bye-bye.